Let's continue with my thoughts on a Zoom Kingdom Hall meeting from last year that I signed in for. Last time, I shared about the talk they gave before getting into the study article. Today, we'll look at the article and the responses members gave to the questions. To start, one of their elders gets into study article 19, Nothing Can Make the Righteous Stumble. The brother starts off by having someone read the first 2 paragraphs and then reads the first question about that for some of the members to answer. Basically, he's asking them to regurgitate what they just read, and that's what they do. It's about as mindless as you can get. FYI, Mike Felker did a great review of this article. So if you'd like to hear more, please check out his video. I'll link it in the notes below for you. I must say, I agree with Mike in his review that Watchtower sure loves to share quotes, but without telling you who or what they're quoting. They also love to use the ellipsis, those 3 little dots, to split up quotes and try to make them say what they want instead of what the author intended. And that's the case here. I decided to do a search for this quote to see if I could find it, and I did. The book is called Labor Avoidance by John Hewer. Hopefully I said that right. I couldn't find much information on him, as I gather he's a pretty obscure author and university philosophy professor. From what I could see in this part of his book, he has developed a very anti-capitalist and anti-church rhetoric to promote as if they're both the same and both basically evil. One reason I could see Watchtower liking this book is that he regularly broad brushes the church and likes to refer to it as powerless, meaningless, shallow, and selfish. He clearly has a bone to pick with what he refers to as the church, and Watchtower loves to do the same thing. Now really, if he were only specifically talking about wishy-washy, seeker-sensitive, progressive churches, I'd largely agree with his assessment, but from what I've been able to read from his work, he's not. He's bashing all of Christianity without having taken the time to do any real research. It's just a standard example of Romans 1 in action. And I can see why Watchtower would like it. But I wonder how they feel about some of the other things he comments on, like his anti-capitalist rants. Would they even dare comment on that? I mean, without capitalism, it would be much harder for them to keep on bringing in their billions of dollars, wouldn't it? What's more, from what I've been able to see, this author appears to be promoting woke and Marxist ideologies. What does Watchtower think about that? Is this really someone they should be quoting from? Okay, that was a bit of a rabbit trail, but I couldn't resist since the quote was just so easy to find, and it's such a great example of what they so often do. Next, they move on to the following paragraph, first with someone reading it, and then someone answering the question with a regurgitation of what they just read. Then they put up a picture for the followers to examine, and a couple of people are called on to describe it based specifically on the paragraph that was just read to them. What we see is a graphic of what is supposed to be Jesus, a very white man here, sitting around chatting with regular, ordinary people, also all of whom look very white. All the men in the picture do have beards, but I have to say, they sure look rather professionally trimmed, don't they? And again, this is all kindergarten level discussion time with the absolute simplest questions and answers. I guess that's all part of the gaslighting and brainwashing. They make the members feel good about always being able to get the right answer to any of the questions without even ever having to put in any effort, research, or even to bother thinking at all. So they carry on with the same format with the next reading and questions. Paragraph and question 5 really stood out to me because they're doing more of their broad brushing using the word clergy with disdain and saying that they prefer rich and popular members in their churches. It's a short paragraph, but quite a few witnesses lined up to answer the question. Let me share the answers they give, because this is the part where I probably laughed the most. They weren't just regurgitating the short paragraph, but adding their own jabs at clergy, even with stories to share. First, I'm going to quickly read the paragraph to set the stage. 5. Do we see the same problem today? Yes, many clergymen are eager to accept as members of their congregations individuals who are prominent, wealthy, and viewed as wise by the world. Such clergy do this even though the morals and lifestyle of those new members often are out of harmony with God's standards. The same clergymen look with disdain on Jehovah's zealous, morally clean servants because they are not prominent by this world's standards. As Paul said, God chose those who are looked down on. However, to Jehovah, all his faithful servants are precious. This whole paragraph is so laughable. It's just a giant broad brush. Who are they even talking about? It's all about creating the feeling of us versus them dichotomy and then giving their followers opportunity to fuel the fire for one another. And boy, do they. The first responder starts off by talking about how clergy looks down on JWs for not having prominence or money. Then she adds to that by mentioning various JWs who apparently brought Watchtower teaching into a number of European countries and how they were all mere humble tradesmen. She said she found that by researching a scripture. I'm guessing that means she was looking on their website for something to add to her answer for brownie points. From there, she compared that to the apostles being fishermen, etc., like they all came from the lowly working class, just like Jehovah's Witnesses. Though she missed the little problem that tax collectors tended to be pretty wealthy because of the crooked way that they operated. Oops. Then she brought it right back to how clergy looks down on brothers and sisters today. The next person to answer gets right into comparing clergy to the Pharisees. Again, he doesn't clarify what he means by the word clergy, but he also goes beyond what was written in the paragraph and starts telling them about clergy who, of course, accept members who are popular in the world. He gives an example of clergy accepting the mafia. Now, maybe there are some, like Roman Catholic churches, that have done that, but it's not common for them as far as I know, and certainly not among actual Christian churches, which of course he knows nothing about. Then the next person regurgitates the end of the paragraph and says that no matter how clergy view JWs, they are precious in Jehovah's eyes. Again, that dichotomy mixed with pride is brought out. The next person to answer, yes, there's more, gets into how media praises clergy, such as giving a lot of attention when a new pope is chosen. She goes on to compare that to how there is no fanfare when a new governing body member is chosen. Again, I was laughing here. The Pope is a huge international figure, so when a new one takes that position, it's kind of big news. The governing body was virtually unknown to the world, including to Jehovah's Witnesses, for most of the Watchtower's existence. It's only more recently that they've put themselves more into the spotlight. And who around the world really cares about an event like that other than Jehovah's Witnesses themselves? Why should that be in the media? I mean, really. The LDS Church is at least double the size of Jehovah's Witnesses, and yet we don't see anything in the media when they instill new leadership either, do we? Or how about new Muslim leaders? Their religion is massive, yet we don't see much in the media about their changes in leadership either. So the comparison of the governing body to the Pope was really laughable. She finishes by calling the governing body our future kings and priests who deserve the prominence, as if there's been some kind of travesty committed here. That part was just sad to hear. They really revere those 8 men in New York as if they are almost to be praised or something. It sounds like they care more about them than they do about their Jesus. He's not even a footnote in these answers. The next person to answer, yep, another one, gets right into the scripture reference in the article and makes a point of reading it. I haven't seen a lot of these meetings, but I'm guessing that's a pretty common way to answer these questions, making them feel like they've done their research by looking up whatever proof text is in the article. She reads them verses 28 to 29, and then says that it's talking about Jehovah's Witnesses and that the clergy should look at that as if it will open their eyes or something. Then the next person, yep, we got one more, to answer, quotes verse 27. I do wonder if she felt like a bit of wind was taken out of her sails because the previous person had read verses 28 to 29 already. But she still uses verse 27 to talk about how clergy look down on JWs for not going to seminary or getting a higher education. Again, who is this clergy they keep mentioning? No one gives any sort of definition. Then she points to the faithful and discreet slave, aka the governing body, the Bible, science, prophecy, and history as what Jehovah uses to make them wise. If only she knew that the faithful and discreet slave is a parable, not the governing body. And if only she knew about all the Watchtower's failed prophecies and historic revisionism. A quick side note, I have personally mentioned some of this to her a number of years ago, but she chose to ignore it. And we're not done yet. Another member jumps right in to how the clergy loves rich, prominent people. They just love this slanderous accusation, don't they? It really makes them feel proud. She goes on to share a story of a prominent local woman who was picked up and brought to her church by her clergy when no one else was. Again, I had to laugh. How did this woman even know about this? And if it is actually true, what were the circumstances surrounding this situation? Was it really because she was prominent? Or perhaps because she just needed a ride? And how does this woman know that other people who needed a ride didn't also get one? Or were there even any others who needed a ride? So many questions. But no, let's just assume it's clergy favoring some rich or famous person. Good grief. You can hear how they all figuratively are patting themselves on the back with great pride in their so-called humility. Finally, they move on to paragraph 6, which talks about how Jehovah uses humble people to do his will. Again, I can see and hear how they are all so very proud of how humble they are. You see any problems with that? I am sure it all serves to reinforce the organization's requirement that witnesses not get higher education or pursue a career, instead choosing to slave away at low-paying jobs so that they can put every spare hour into Watchtower service. This is pure brainwashing, with a couple of proof texts thrown in that have nothing to do with the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society Corporation. This time, the elder has a member read the proof text from Matthew, and then they get into the questions and answers for this paragraph. The first guy to answer immediately quotes the proof text from the psalm listed in the paragraph, and then tries to summarize it. Then another member answers with another regurgitation of the paragraph, along with her thankfulness that basically giving up having a real career is appreciated by Jehovah. She definitely got the message that Watchtower is sending her. Yet another witness answers with the same sorts of comments and also bashing people that have an education as if they're automatically bad people who use their intellect to believe false things and that Jehovah could never be able to use. Then on to reading paragraph 7, which I can largely agree with. The first person to answer summarized what was said, and that was fine too. And the next person to answer did the same thing, and it was also fine. So then they move on to paragraph 8, which warns about false teachers. The irony here is pretty thick, since this study is coming straight from false teachers. But the members take what is being said as meaning everyone else except for them. It's really sad. This would have been a great opportunity for an ex-JW who has woken up to speak to this. Sadly, it didn't happen in this meeting. So then it's back to members giving their answers by summarizing what was said in the paragraph and mentioning the proof text. The next person to answer expands that to include a commentary that it's common for non-JWs to say that all beliefs are equally good. And yes, there certainly are some people who will say that sort of thing, which, is also pretty easy to knock down. But he's using the standard JW broad brush to suggest that everyone else believes this except for JWs. Next up is paragraph 9, which is particularly full of scripture twisting and arguments that don't flow from the proof text. It's pretty crazy, really. And again, Check out Mike Felker's review of this one. He really gets into the many problems with this paragraph. So I won't spend a lot of time on it here. One member answers the question on this paragraph with the usual regurgitation, and then the elder shows an image from the article for them to examine and pick apart. Again, this is such kindergarten level teaching. The first person to answer that one paints another broad brush about how other religions are mixing business and money making with their religious practices, just like what's happening at the temple. Again, the irony here is thick, as the Watchtower Corporation is making millions off its followers, and they just don't see it. The next person to answer more directly answers the elder's question about what sounds they think they would have heard when Jesus was turning over the tables at the temple. The next person to answer basically says the exact same thing as the previous one. Then they read paragraph 10, which does the same thing as paragraph 9, pushing their novel beliefs without any actual scriptural support, but instead providing proof texts that don't really speak to their teachings at all. Again, they ironically claim that churches are using false teachings to control their members, which, of course, is exactly what Watchtower does. They yet again throw around the generic, broad brush word clergy to try and really drive home their condemnation of everyone outside the organization. Mike Felker also gives an excellent refutation of what they're saying in this paragraph, so be sure to go check out his video. He did such a great job that we don't need to go through it all here. So the first person to respond to the question does the usual summarizing of what she read in the paragraph, but also adding in words like confusing, hypothetical, and pagan to describe biblical Christian beliefs that they reject. It's emotionally charged language to keep them hanging tightly to the dichotomy and feelings of superiority to everyone else because they live in submission to the Watchtower and everything it teaches, no matter how often those teachings keep changing. The next person focuses on the doctrine of hell and why she considers it scary and bad, and has to throw in a comment about those nasty clergy who use it to control their church members. Again, I'm not saying that has never happened. It certainly has. But actual Christian churches, again, don't do this. They don't want to know or believe that, though. The next person to respond pretty much says the same stuff, but then focuses on how Jesus is loving and God is love, and how it's loving of JWs to share Watchtower teaching with them, regardless of how anyone responds. And I am sure there are many witnesses who feel this way, since they really do believe they are in the truth. The next person starts in by rejecting God having a plan, as if that's absurd to believe, even though the Bible clearly tells us many times that he does. I've noticed through all of this Q&A that regularly they praise the Watchtower for what it says and also the graphics that they post, as if they're the most beautiful and insightful thing they've ever seen. The words of praise are used so often that they have a really hollow ring to them, like the members know it's going to give them brownie points for including it in their answers. So we'll stop here for now and get to the rest of the questions and answers in the next video. Man, these meetings feel like they go on forever, don't they? I can just imagine how bored, especially the kids are, doing this every single week.